Thank you very much, Per Espen, and it's great to be back here at BI. And also thank you for this opportunity to talk about something I am actually a bit proud of that we have developed in Oslo, which is the climate budget. So my name is Daniel. I work as a political advisor to the Vice Mayor for Environment and Transport in Oslo, which is currently Arild Hermstad, while Lan Marie Berg is on parental leave. And I also, although I'm not the one in the newspapers ordinary, I'm also a politician from the Green Party. And I've been there since 2015 when we came into the city government after our landslide election. And I would actually like to start my presentation by talking about or connecting the dots back to the work we did here at the BI, because that is, I think, an important part of why I came into this idea of thinking about the climate budget. So here we have a few slides, and probably many of you, or maybe many of you know this, but back in 2006, Jørgen, which is over here, he was chair of a comprehensive public study into how to make Norway into a low-emission country. You know, the kind of studies that the current government is still doing while not cutting emissions. And at what was at that time called Center for Climate Strategy, we prepared annual reports on the state of Norwegian climate policy. The whole idea behind this project was to provide more oversight and public awareness about what was actually happening, and maybe even more important, what was not happening in Norwegian climate policy. The politicians, you see, were talking about how important climate change is, but as you probably also are aware, Norwegian CO2 emissions have hardly gone down, and they are still higher than they were in 1990, while our neighboring countries have cut their emissions by more than 20%. Which, of course, in plain English, means that we have failed in our Norwegian climate policy, and politicians are still getting away with it. So how is this possible? And I think a major problem was that the actual goals were really obscured, deliberately obscured, so they would seem far more ambitious than they were. I still remember spending days understanding that Jens Stoltenberg's goal of cutting 30% of Norwegian emissions by 2020 actually, when you cleared away the fog, was only 5%. And most others made the same mistake. Journalists, other politicians, ordinary citizens, businesses. And I suspect also civil servants and even government ministers. So at the heart of Norwegian climate policy, there has been this big obscured secret. Our goals are actually among the weakest in Europe and very few understood. Climate policy, of course, is very complicated, and it needs coordinated effort across society to succeed. Ministers need to be held to account to ensure that this is actually prioritized. But when ambitions actually are so low, it is very easy for each minister to come up with reasons why his part of these emission cuts should not be realized. And when the goals and actions are so obscured, it is very difficult for the public, other politicians, and the media to keep them to account. And this is the problem the climate budget tries to solve. So it is based on total openness about what our goals are, so they are easy to understand by everybody. The climate budget includes a range of measures. It estimates their effect, and maybe the most important, it also lays out very clearly who is in charge. In this way, progress can easily be followed. We can say whether we are on track or not, and we can also see who actually delivers and who does not. And for businesses and for citizens who for many years have been hearing that climate policy or climate change is so important, but not really seeing a lot of action, now they have a framework where they actually can trust that change is coming and that we mean what we are saying. So fast forward to 2015 and to Østmarksetra, where the new political platform for the city government of Oslo was developed in 2015. Climate and environment policy, of course, was a cornerstone of this platform. And while countries and cities now around the world are declaring climate emergency, we did this in 2015. We said that climate action is not to be taken care of by somebody else, somewhere else at another time. We should act here and now. The platform set ambitious targets for Oslo: 36% reduction of emissions from Oslo by 2020, 50% as soon as possible after 2022. This was initially 2020, but that was based on when the national government prioritized funding for CCS capture and storage. And also a 95% reduction, practically zero emission by 2030. This was 20 years faster than the previous city government in Oslo. And the platform also said that we should develop a climate budget for Oslo as a part of the financial budget. And as far as we know, Oslo is the first city in the world to have a climate budget for its entire geographic area. An important part of inspiration for this was also the UK Climate Change Act, which also has a similar set of mechanisms. And it was presented for the first time in 2016, together with the fiscal budget for 2017. I will now go a little bit further into the details about how it works. It covers Oslo's direct emissions, which is called Scope 1 for those of you who are familiar with that term. So indirect emissions are not included at this point, although this is also something we are working on with our new 2030 climate strategy, because we know that Oslo's indirect footprint is 6 to 13 times higher than what our terrestrial emissions are. So it covers the geographical area of Oslo, not only the city government itself, but the entire geographic area. All emission sectors that are available in the statistics, which basically is most of the emissions. It's a combination of national, regional, and local measures. It's a combination of quantified and non-quantified measures. And I think the easiest way we have actually tried to explain how this works is that we count emissions as the same way as we count money. Because the fundamental idea is that we are budgeting towards the future by identifying the measures and instruments we need to reach our climate targets. So the annual climate budget has the same structure as the ordinary city budget. It is the second chapter in our budget, and it is fully integrated with the rest of the document. Each year, we propose a maximum emission volume for the next year, just like the maximum economic expenditure in the financial budget. And this is something that is discussed and then finally voted upon in the City Council. The climate budget contains the necessary measures to ensure that emissions are reduced enough in order to keep within the maximum emission volume. For each measure, as I said, a responsible entity within the city of Oslo is identified. And so the budget really clearly states what has to be done, by whom, when, and at what cost. The climate budget is also, just like the rest of the budget, it is the responsibility of the Vice Mayor of Finance. While our department is a very important technical partner in developing the document. And I remember back in 2015 and 2016 when we developed this, it was quite exciting to see how this process with the finance guys was going to go, because we of course had heard about conflicts between the finance and climate departments in the Norwegian government. But what we found actually was that this challenge of developing this new climate budget was something that the finance guys really eagerly took upon them. And they thought this was, yeah, it was exciting. It was, and I suspect it might have something to do with it, that it was actually a lot of spreadsheets and numbers. And they liked it. And I think this has been critical to the success of this system, that it has been integrated within an existing structure that actually works. We know the budget works. The budget has for centuries been a tool to make sure that we can handle complicated problems across society and make sure that nobody spends more money than we have. And in the same way, this ensures that we don't emit more CO2 than we can. So here we have a short overview of the government of Oslo. And basically, the point here is that most of these different sectors have their own stakes in the climate budget and responsibilities. So it's not something that only the environment minister or vice mayor is responsible for. For example, the finance mayor is responsible for public procurement, which is a massive measure or tool we can use in Oslo. And for example, the business development mayor is responsible for all public construction in Oslo, which is also a major source of emissions. And And yeah, just briefly, like the budget tool. So this is the City Council adopts the budget resolution in December, and then basically what happens then is that all the entities of the city government, they get their letters about how much money are you allowed to spend on what, and they also get their directives on what climate measures are they supposed to carry out and how in the coming year. And this is something they also report on several times per year. When they report on how much money they have spent, they also have to report how is progress going on your measures in the climate budget. So it's followed up followed up basically just like the ordinary operating and investment budget in Oslo. And this, of course, allows us in the government to constantly be aware of where we are. Are there any problems with some of the measures? Then we can put more funding or try to organize ourselves out of the problem, or maybe even find other measures that can sort of compensate for the problems. And I think it is fair to say that this system, it works. This is the emissions from Oslo since 2009. Since currently, the last figures for 2017, Oslo emitted just above 1 million tons of CO2. And this was down 200,000 tons, or 16% since 2015. And as you can see, we are now on a downward and quite rapidly downward track. And in Oslo, the transport sector is the biggest source of emissions. 2/3 of emissions come from the transport sector, and that is why, for example, that the new toll ring that is currently being frequently debated is a very, very important tool in order to reduce emissions. And the toll ring, of course, is also part of the climate budget. It consists of more than 40 measures and instruments at different scales, national, regional, and local. Some of them are directly reducing emissions. Others are prerequisites for other measures, again, that will cut emissions. For 15 of them, we have managed to quantify the estimated effect in terms of how much CO2 it will cut. And for a number of others, we have not been able to pinpoint exactly how many tons it will cut, but we know that it also has an effect. Yes, and let me see. Yes, so we have one problem, of course, is that the national statistics for local CO2 emissions they are published every year, but with 18 months delay. So the last statistics we now have are for 2017. So we have also developed our own system of tracking progress. It's called the climate barometer, and everybody can Google this and find out yourselves. It's updated quarterly with new data on the main emission sources.
Do you report to the stock exchange?
Not yet. So I would think I'll jump to the way forward. Basically, just one final point. I think what we also have seen is that one of the major assets of the climate budget is that we have identified at the current point that we are not sure that we will actually come as far as we have said in 2020. We think we are probably close, but this generates a push within the city government in always finding new measures, always trying to maximize the effects of the things we are doing. And when we are in a couple of weeks, we are having a budget conference. Then the climate budget is also a topic that we spend a lot of time discussing in order to ensure that we have enough measures to be fairly certain that we will reach our goal. And I think this is how climate policy will be carried out for a long time, because we will probably never have enough measures. We will always have to chase more and more effective measures. And this is something that is very easily done and facilitated by this structure. So to round up, I would say that we are now working on the 2019 climate budget. It's quite exciting. We are also quite soon presenting a new strategy for Oslo towards 2030, how to become a zero-emission city, probably the first in the world. It's coming in a couple of weeks. This system, I think, really works. It is now, we are being contacted by cities across the world from the IPCC, who are really interested in this sort of innovation in governance, as Per Espen talked about. I think it's very important for businesses in Oslo, who are now stepping up and making a lot of changes, because they know that if they want to be profitable in the future, they need to also be a part of the change. Thank you very much.